Hi, my name's Bev Johnson Bender. I'm going to talk to you today about some birth imprints again. Only today we're going to narrow it down a little bit and we're going to talk about drug imprints. And I'm going to give you a couple of hypothetical examples of how a drug imprint might affect an adult in their life. So, first of all, I just want to talk about nicotine. I mean, obviously, there are many drugs that could influence people in utero and during their birth. But for right now, I just want to talk about nicotine because it's one of the hardest drugs for a baby to cope with. A baby's nervous system is really slow and it's really delicate, and nicotine is really harsh. So we have footage actually of a baby that was squeezing the umbilical cord when their mom took a puff off a cigarette because the baby was trying to stop the smoke and the nicotine from coming down into their developing little body. One of the primary imprints of nicotine is an imprint of separation and alienation. And one of the things that happens to a baby that's gestating in the womb of a smoker is that because the womb is so toxic, the amniotic fluid is actually really itchy for the baby, and so the baby tries to get away from the wall of the womb. And one of the things that these babies tend to do is they go out to a more expanded consciousness. They have a hard time holding themselves present in their body. So when we look at how that kind of an imprint might affect a person as they grow through their childhood and go into adulthood, that can be the kind of situation where a person has a hard time just holding themselves in their own being when things around them maybe get a little bit chaotic, get uncomfortable. They might tend to kind of want to go off into that consciousness, that more expanded consciousness that they became familiar with when they were in the womb. Because it's a deep and primal imprint, and it worked then, so we don't know any different. We expect that it's a good solution for us now, although we know that there are more effective ways to deal with that. And so that's what we do with pre and perinatal work and family ancestral work is we identify where we have an unconscious belief, and we address that, and then we're able to look at techniques that we can bring into our life and make our lives a little bit more manageable and effective. So that's an example of a birth imprint from nicotine. I'm going to talk about a drug that was used many years ago. It was actually used when I was born in 1960. It was developed quite earlier than that, and it was used for probably, I think, about a decade after I was born. And the reason I'm using this drug as an example is because it too left really heavy imprints on the babies that had experienced this kind of a birth. And so what it was a combination of morphine and what was known as scopolamine. And scopolamine was a derivative of nightshade plants, and so they took the nightshade plants and the morphine and they mixed it up into this concoction, and they gave it to mothers that were going into delivery. And the purpose of this drug was because they sincerely believed that it helped women to not have any pain during their birth. That was not true. People experienced just as much pain as they would have without the drug. They just didn't remember it because the scopolamine actually had like hallucinogenic reactions, or people had hallucinogenic reactions with it. So this really potent drug, and it was a horrific experience for the women that were drugged. And I'm not even going to get into the details because it was so horrible. But just knowing that that was their experience, and knowing that this drug crossed the placental barrier into the baby. So the mother was heavily drugged, and so was the baby. And if you'll recall the story of, or this idea we have of the doctor holding up the baby and smacking the baby's bum and getting the baby to breathe, that actually came from back in those times, because babies like myself that were born under that influence were usually born pretty comatose, and we needed a slap on the bum to get us going, because lots of times we just were barely breathing. So it was a pretty horrific experience, and that kind of birth leaves a really heavy imprint. So I'm just going to give you a hypothetical example of what might happen to somebody who had a really heavy drug imprint like that, and they carry that with them in their adult life. And then I can give you some examples of some ways that they might overcome that. So let's say this person wants to print something on from their computer, and they realize, oh, my printer and my computer aren't talking. Okay, so they try to get it figured out, and all of a sudden their head starts, their brain is really swirling, their head is spinning, and they get really frustrated. They might even get a little bit snappy with anybody who's trying to help them, because they're actually going through a life or death experience. And I know it sounds really funny to think that somebody might feel like they're dying because their printer and their computer aren't communicating, but in essence, they have this primal imprint that's flying up to the top that's saying, I don't even know how to be born. I can't get through this mess. Nobody on the outside knows how to help me. There's no support. I'm probably going to die. So, one thing that the person might do is, first of all, slow everything right down. This person needs support. So the first thing they might want to do is call the helpline. They need somebody who can walk them through the steps slowly. Another thing they might do is, if the technician can't slow down enough for them, because some technicians have that really racy, fast pace too, they can just say, I need another technician. I understand that this is how the speed that you move at, but I can't go that fast. So can I please talk to somebody else? The other thing they might recognize is that if there is any other noise in the room, it's really distracting. Their head might start to swirl. Their brain might feel really fuzzy. And it's that imprint coming up again. It's that swirling thing that they experienced in their birth. They might find that if anybody tries to talk to them besides the technician, it's just too much. Their brain can't separate all the information that's coming in, which again would be that imprint. There would be people probably talking pretty loud and frantic and chaotic, because in that particular case, I suspect a lot of babies almost died. A lot of mothers almost died. And so there would have been just this real sense of chaos in their system around them. So if the person can recognize that, oh, when there's too much noise, too much stimulation, it kind of throws me out of myself and I need support. So I need a technician that can slow it down, help me through the steps, and B, I have to be really aware of a nice quiet environment. I might have to ask people in my environment to not talk to me for a minute. Maybe I can just shut a door and just have some quiet time where I can just go nice and slow with the technician. We have to find techniques to get through these kinds of imprints. And the other thing is that these imprints can be hard to recognize on our own. And so sometimes we just need somebody to help us through and to help us see what the imprint is and to help us maybe come up with some techniques that might help us hold ourselves during those rather chaotic times. And once we can do that, we get to remember that we have developed adult skills along the way. And what we see is that, oh, this isn't a catastrophic situation. I'm not going to die. This really isn't a life or death situation like the one that I experienced when I was coming into the world. And so then we learn how we can hold ourselves in these kind of circumstances, and then we get to have wins. We get to be like, hey, I've got this. I actually know how to figure some technological things out. Like I'm pretty good. So anyway, I hope these examples are helpful to you and that they might help you recognize some of your own imprints or some different possibilities that might be lying within your own unconscious. And if you feel like you would like some help in sorting through them, you can always reach out to me and we can do a session together. So I hope this was helpful and hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.